There used to be a time when the best indie games would go unnoticed, whispered about on gaming forums and rarely in contention for awards, swept aside by annual releases and the millions and millions and millions of dollars spent on animating the protagonist's eyebrows. Not anymore though. In fact, it could be argued that well-crafted indies receive more love than their far bigger cousins. Huge AAA games like the latest Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty may come along and make a huge splash, but it's indie games like Undertale that people remember the fondest. Indie games prove that you don't need a huge budget, several teams and a whole lot of hyperbole to sell a video game in the 21st century. Here are some of the finest examples that the smaller guys have to offer. This list of essential indie games, which is in alphabetical order, is our best attempt to somehow whittling down some of the best games of all time to just 20. Yeah, wish us luck. Before then though, if you could slap the like and smash the subscribe, we'd super appreciate it as we crawl our way towards 10,000 subs after 20,000 years. We're an indie YouTube channel, god damn it, give us some critical acclaim! 1. The Binding of Isaac, Rebirth. A macabre game about a damned boy shooting tears out of his eyes to defeat aberrations may not sound like a big seller on paper, but in execution, few roguelikes do it as well as The Binding of Isaac, Rebirth. It's a truly bizarre adventure that deals with the impact of domestic abuse and religion, and one that kind of has to be recommended, if for nothing but the other indie games it's inspired over the years. Once you play The Binding of Isaac, it finds a way of burrowing into your brain until you're on the upteenth procedurally generated level without having had any respite for hours. You also take on big things of poo, which, not being funny, but can Call of Duty say it's done that? No, didn't think so, maybe they should. Replace zombies with poopies. I don't know, I've lost my mind. Next entry, number 2, Braid. Possibly the title that started off the demand for indie games off the beaten track the most, Braid is seen as a masterpiece by many. It's hard to argue with that. It blends its retro stylings with a gutting narrative perfectly. Largely a puzzle game, Braid features Prince of Persia-esque mechanics that allow you to alter time, but the real attraction here is the story. I won't spoil things for you, just go and play it if you haven't yet. It isn't on any of the current consoles though, it will be with an anniversary release sometime in 2021. Just don't look up this game like at all, otherwise it will get spoiled for you. If you also have some tracing paper, a calculator and a rhombus, you should also check out Jonathan Blow's second game, The Witness, which will make you feel like an actual idiot. Number 3, Celeste. A game pulled directly from the Meat Boy school of inch-perfect platform and should really be a bit snappier, but I digress. Celeste is what you would call the quintessential indie game. Lo-fi and low on outrageous spectacle, it instead focuses on the most important part of any game, the gameplay. You really dread to think how much work and attention to detail has to go into making platforming feel just right. As you leap and dash your way through Celeste's gorgeous and understated world as Madeline on her way to the peak of the titular mountain, you will appreciate all the effort from Matt Makes Games. And then maybe do a massive cry. Even if it's not just Matt making these games these days, the small team behind Celeste is still quite remarkable in their achievements, and I cannot wait to see what they do next. Celeste Team Racing, here's hoping. Number 4, Cuphead. One of the most exciting indie games at the time of initial release on Xbox One, Cuphead's early Disney style belied the truth. This was not a game for kids. While you could argue that this run and gun platformer was no harder than many of its inspirations from the 90s, that didn't stop a legion of players from putting themselves through hell and back to save Cuphead's soul from the devil, and loving every second of pain. And thanks to the game's good use of couch co-op, misery loves company. Thanks to its gorgeous hand-drawn animation, watercolour backgrounds, and even an original jazz soundtrack which is as cool as it sounds, Cuphead has gone down as one of the biggest success stories not just in the indie sphere, but the whole gaming industry. You really should play it even if you don't like quote-unquote hard games, but beware the tutorial, that thing will make children of men. Number 5, Dead Cells. A Metroidvania with roguelike leanings that doesn't lean too heavily on the games it was inspired by, Dead Cells is, quite simply, a treat. You will die and die again until you feel anywhere near competent at the game, and even then it isn't a stroll in the park. Using more and more outlandish weapons and increased skills the deeper into the island you progress, death is never the end in Dead Cells. It's just an excuse to jump back on the roller coaster. Featuring almost endless replayability and a wealth of secrets to discover, it's one of not only 2018's best indie games, but one of the best of all time. High praise, but that's what you get for being an early access game that did all the right things ahead of a full launch. Motion Twin have worked pretty hard to bring tons of extra content to the game since launch, so prepare to die and die again, and love every second of it. Number 6, Devil Daggers. Based on your first 5 minutes with Devil Daggers, you almost definitely won't get it. Upon further inspection, there still isn't much to get, which is why it's so captivating. It knows exactly what it is and does the basics so well that it doesn't matter if it doesn't traditionally evolve as such. The premise is simple. You play as a lo-fi character who can shoot daggers out of his hands at demons. It's a pretty much endless onslaught of screen-filling nightmares. You would do well to last for even longer than a couple of minutes. Devil Daggers constantly teaches you to better yourself, fostering a sense of accomplishment that DICE and EA could only dream of. There's even an Easter egg for this gem in Doom Eternal, so any FPS game that's good enough for id should be good enough for you. Number 7, Disco Elysium. It's kind of daunting to try and condense the encompassing madness of Zome's Disco Elysium into just a few lines for a YouTube list. But at its simplest, Disco Elysium is a murder mystery where you control a down-on-his-luck detective who drank so much that he's forgotten who he is, as we have all done. It's so much more than that though. While the murder is central to the plot, there's so much going on in and around the seaside town of Martinez that it's easy to get distracted. Want to try and understand why an angry Scouse kid is the way he is? Give it a go. Interested to hear what kind of cockatoo you are? Sure. Want to get blackout drunk constantly and make everyone hate you? Knock yourself out. Literally. Disco Elysium is an RPG marvel featuring a level of depth to its writing and malleable narrative that most AAA studios could only ever dream of. A true indie gem, and also I want Kim to be my dad. Number 8, Fez. Say what you want about its controversial creator, but Phil Fish crafted something wonderful with Fez in 2012 after years of development and anticipation. Don't hold out hope of ever seeing a sequel though. Fish has completely backed away from pretty much everything. It delivered on its promise, helped in no small part thanks to its charming visuals and unique perspective shifts. Fez allows the player to flip between 2D and 3D at will to solve its many puzzles, which is quite the technical marvel when you consider the small team behind it. As much as Fez may have been inspired by games of yesteryear, its inspiration is felt in many more contemporary games today, and it still holds up incredibly well when you play it in 2021. Be prepared to feel like a bit of an idiot though. Fez will make your brain feel a little fuzzy. Number 9, Hades. Roguelikes and roguelites and all kinds of rogue spin-offs are a huge part of the indie sphere, yet Hades may very well have perfected the formula. It boasts the kind of slick action that most AAA games throw hundreds of millions of dollars at. Hades casts you as Zagreus, the son of Hades who is trying to escape from the underworld, but it's just as hard as it sounds. Don't be deterred by your failures. Hades is the kind of game that actually makes it fun to die, thanks to how much there is to see and people to talk to during the downtime. It also helps that its music and writing is best in class, and it just keeps evolving once you manage to escape from the underworld, as well as the fact that you can become best mates with a cheeky skeleton boy. Expect to be playing Hades for 100 hours, and even then that's being a bit on the conservative side. Number 10, Hollow Knight. That another Metroidvania lands on this list of the best indie games shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Indie devs have a knack of falling back on the subgenre and twisting its conventions into something that feels completely fresh. Seldom do that as masterfully as Team Cherry with Hollow Knight however, even more remarkable considering that it was kickstarted for a relative pittance. When you die, your items aren't lost for good, you just have to slay your own ghost, which yeah, just. An interesting mechanic and one of many which make up Hollow Knight's big spectacle. It's a given that Hollow Knight will push you to the limits of your patience, with punishing bosses and a learning curve like the edge of a bloody cliff. But it's worth sticking with to discover the mysteries of its sumptuous dark world. With it now being on pretty much every modern platform going, you're running out of excuses not to play this game. Number 11, Outlast. Here's proof that many maybe undervalue what an indie game can be. Despite having better presentation than 90% of its horror game peers out at the time of its release, Red Barrel's Outlast is a proud indie. It has the visual sheen of a game built on a far higher budget, along with the atmosphere and tone to match. For most of its playtime, Outlast doesn't relent, putting Miles Upshur, the almost defenseless protagonist, and the player under serious duress. It helps that its setting, an overrun mental asylum, is one of the creepiest in gaming. You're never too sure about what's ahead as you creep around a corner with nothing but a camcorder to guide your path. Sometimes it's a penis! Outlast 2 is also pretty great, though does tend to split opinion. You won't find many scarier games than either of these since the franchise started back in 2013. Number 12. Papers, Please. If I told you that one of the most absorbing gaming experiences you're ever likely to have is digitally stamping papers at checkpoints, you would probably be right to question me. Papers, Please is as simple as that, but it offers a depth that you can only discover the more you become immersed within the world of either subterfuge or loyalty to an oppressive state. As an immigration officer, your job is to ensure that nobody who doesn't belong in the fictional Arstotzka makes their way in. At least that's what it seems like, until the game truly unfurls and shows you layers upon layers upon layers of intrigue and tough decisions. Who you choose to let in can have wide and deadly implications, so every document stamped feels like the cutting of a wire on a bomb. One of the most completely compelling indie games ever made. Be prepared to feel like an utter piece of shit. Number 13. Shovel Knight. One of the few Kickstarter success stories, Shovel Knight is an advertisement for what good crowdfunding can do for indie games. Without the right platform for funding, we may have never been able to get our hands on one of the greatest ever side-scrollers in gaming history. The devs have also repaid that kindness with constant free updates that adds hours upon hours of gameplay, and have even started up their own studio for publishing more indie games. History is the key word for Shovel Knight, as it owes a lot to the stylings of the classics found on the NES, or NES if you're weird. Despite being a game cultivated from many different inspirations, Shovel Knight managed the remarkable feat of feeling old in a good way, while also brand new. Difficult but never unfair, Yacht Club Games' debut needs to find its way onto your wishlist if you're yet to find out what all the fuss is about. But where should you play it though? Well, whichever of the 90,000 platforms it's on that you prefer, of course. We double dog dare you to play it on the Wii U. Number 14. Spelunky. You won't find many of the best indie games as influential as Spelunky. Even though its more modern, arguably superior sequel could be argued as the better pick here, the original Spelunky has to be included for just how much it's done for so many different genres and the indie sphere as a whole. A retro platformer that helped to popularise the modern roguelike as we know it, Spelunky sees you descending into many different caverns, either alone or with up to 3 friends. Each run will be different, but one thing will stay the same. You will die in just the most ridiculous way. Constantly maddening but always charming as heck, Spelunky is a massively influential game from its visuals to its music and even its very DNA. Speaking of, the game's source code is out in the wild, so anyone can iterate on Spelunky's excellence if they so wish, or dare to try. Number 15. Stardew Valley. The work of one man that made a whole lot of men and women around the world feel pretty fuzzy and warm, Stardew Valley is beautiful in its simplicity, but deadly in its addictiveness. Before you even know what's happening, 4 months have passed and you're only just regaining consciousness from its grip. A game so good that pirates even started buying copies of it for each other because they felt bad about stealing it. You can approach Stardew Valley at your own pace, so whether you want to leisurely maintain your farm or go off on adventures, the choice is yours. In a world that never seems to shy away from conflict, the escapism provided by Eric Baron's gem cannot be underestimated. If you're feeling friendly though, the multiplayer mode might help you socialise. Or you could just be like me and grow some vegetables out of spite while blanking out the rest of the world. One of them really, one of them. Number 16. Subnautica. Traditionally speaking, water levels in games are worse than most illnesses. So when a game is almost entirely water-based exploration, you might be right to approach it with caution. Luckily though, Unknown World really nailed the feel of exploring the depths in one of the most inviting and original survival games that's come along in a long time. An early access graduate that used every second of early access correctly, Subnautica drops you on an alien planet with nothing but some flippers, a snorkel and a life pod for refuge. You must try to find an escape while also staying aware of what lies beneath the surface. And there's a lot down there. It's terrifying. That's kind of apt for the game in general. While it may look like any other survival game on the surface, chip away at it for a few hours and you'll find that it's much more than just that. You'll also think it's a horror game the first time you meet a Leviathan. You won't forget that in a hurry. Number 17, Super Meat Boy. Super Meat Boy really shouldn't work. You're a piece of meat jumping around and trying not to fall afoul of the many traps and pitfalls on your way towards saving your girlfriend, Bandage Girl, from Dr. Fetus. It sounds really weird when written out like that. Somehow Team Meat made it all come together wonderfully. Boasting one of the most marvellously responsive control systems ever seen in gaming, Super Meat Boy is all about the fine margins that can make the difference between life and death. It's inspired countless indie games down the years since it was released in 2010 and is available on almost every platform going. You have no excuses not to get lost in this chillingly difficult platformer if you haven't already. You'll throw your controller at the wall and then glue it back together for one more run. Number 18, To the Moon. We really hope that all that stock stuff from earlier in 2021 meant that people invested a ton of money into this game by accident, because it deserves all the money you can give it. If you want your indie games to make your cuticles bleed and brain ache for days, To the Moon may not be for you. However, if you want to connect with something really wonderful that will leave you sat in silence as the credits roll, this is for you. To the Moon revolves around two scientists who are trying to implant memories into an old man's mind so he can die peacefully, and yep, it's suddenly raining on my cheeks. I won't say much more about how the game pans out, it's just something that you really have to experience for yourself. One for those who prefer story over gameplay, but if you take one look at it and think you might not like it, give it a chance to convince you otherwise. Number 19, Undertale. Quite possibly the most widely beloved game on this list, Undertale's excellence isn't in question. It personifies all that's great with indie game culture, as it brought together gamers by capturing their hearts and minds for months on end, and still does today. One of Undertale's most impressive facets is how it leaves it up to the player whether or not they want to resort to violence, allowing you to take the pacifist route instead. This opens up the game and means that your choices all have consequences, creating a narrative that's been praised almost everywhere you look. It's hard to explain what makes Undertale so special within the confines of an already pretty long video. It just kind of is. If you haven't played it yet, that needs to change. And if you have, and number 20, What Remains of Edith Finch. Just saying this game's name might give some people goosebumps. It's the argument of video games as art finally settled for good. A lot of people might look at What Remains of Edith Finch and declare it nothing more than a walking simulator, an assessment which would be entirely unfair. While certainly not the most involved action-packed game, What Remains offers plenty of variety across its many desperately tragic vignettes of a seemingly cursed family. When a younger Finch relative returns to the long-empty Finch household, they uncover the troubled past of the family, ranging from horrible accidents to long battles with depression. You play through all of them, playing as an imaginary king one moment and a sea monster the next. Even if you don't like narrative-driven games, What Remains of Edith Finch is likely to leave a mark on you. So there you have it, the best indie games of all time. If you want to catch our top 50 written version, you can do so down below, where you will also put your comments in the opinion box and let us know your thoughts on this list. Thank you for watching, and thank you for watching.